Hello, everybody. How's it
Hello,
going today, you
hello.
guys?
How's everyone doing?
Welcome, welcome. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this chat on for y'all. Let's see here. Everyone can chat with everyone.
Chat it up.
There we go, you guys. All right. What's up, Durandreb? All right, you guys. If you guys don't mind, drop in the comments where you're coming from. We're a couple minutes late, fashionably late, as we like to say. And yeah, it was mostly because Jason was trying to mess with the lighting. He literally just had to get it just right, and
Had to
still
get it
not.
right.
But
That's not
oh
right.
well.
But it's gonna get dark in just a few minutes, so
Yeah,
decided to get our lights going here a little bit.
yeah, needed some sort of light because yeah, we got a window on us right now, but we live in the Pacific Northwest where it gets dark at 4:30, which is kind of sad. And
Yeah.
4:30 is coming up. Cool, cool. Well, all right, we got some Nova Scotia, we got some Ottawa, we got some California, Ohio,
Nice. All over the place.
Ontario, California,
A
Santa
lot of
Cruz.
California.
Yeah,
California.
a lot of Californias. San Diego. Cool, cool.
Nice.
Colorado.
That's awesome.
Good stuff, you guys.
Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, welcome, welcome. We're super excited for today's presentation. It's all about design, obviously. That's why you guys signed up for it. And we love talking about tiny house design. That's really where we feel like the most important parts of your tiny house comes together at. Obviously, if you're buying a pre-used tiny home or just buying a model or something like that, you don't have as much say in what you're actually purchasing and whatnot. But at the same time, having a really good understanding of design, especially for your tiny house, is important because when you go to look at used tiny homes or tiny house models and whatnot, it's important that you know what is right for you. So that's one of our big things that I just really find important in a tiny house, because in a tiny space, every part of it is really important that it flows and works well for your lifestyle. So
Yep, absolutely. Spot on there. Should we give them a quick intro, who we are?
yeah, let's do it.
So you definitely see some familiar names in here from the Tiny House Conference and the Tiny House community. So some of y'all might already know, but I'm Jason Francis, and this is my brother, Zach Francis. And yeah, we're the co-founders of tinyhouse.com. And yeah, we've been in the tiny house industry since I think it was 2012 is when we first got really started in it, and started building our own tiny house out of my garage, and it literally didn't fit in there. So after building it about halfway, we had to move it out and found a friend's gravel yard that we can go park it on, and so we brought it there, and basically spent the next 6 months building it out, and definitely worked really hard on not only the design as far as the functional design but the aesthetic design, and it really just came together like nothing had been built before in the tiny house world at that point. And when we took some professional photos of it, it just started spreading like wildfire. And at that point we're like, hey, let's double down on this seems to be working. We got our first couple clients out of it, and we started Tiny Heirloom at that point. And over the next 4 or 5 years from there, we built over 100, designed and built over 100 custom tiny homes from people all over the world, and shipped them all over the U.S. And yeah, had a really crazy adventure doing that. And HGTV ended up picking up a Street Series TV show where we filmed 38 episodes of all those tiny homes, and that's called Tiny Luxury if you want to go back and see any of those. But there's some really cool, fun designs that you'll get to see us pull off there.
Yeah, definitely. Tiny luxury is kind of the upper level of tiny house design. It was for sure kind of the crazy, wild stuff, which was obviously the whole point of the TV show. Each episode was a custom tiny house, and so we're just yeah, we're kind of enjoying the aspects of just going as all out as we could. So we're definitely designing some crazy stuff, but there's a lot of really cool, different unique design tactics and techniques and whatnot that you can apply to your tiny house and so on there too. So
Yep. Yeah. So that's definitely a huge part of our experience as far as designing tiny homes. It comes from literally hands-on designing, working with clients really closely to fine-tune each tiny home from a perspective of what will be best for them. And so understanding that basically that takes a lot of understanding of what their lifestyle is, how are they going to be using it, and all those things is Zach's going to be jumping into in a minute, and even stepping further back. We kind of cut our teeth in the tiny house design when we sailed from San Diego to Australia on a sailboat, and so we were in extremely tight quarters, and throughout that time we really grew to understand the and appreciate the importance of space, and so finding all the different nooks and crannies of how you can pack in different things and how to be resourceful and how to have dual use items and storage and all that really played a part in making that trip possible. So we took all of that into the tiny house world, and that's kind of the quick overview of our experience and history in tiny house design.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we talked about today, we have a list of do's and don'ts. It will go relatively quick because we've got quite a few of them. But if you guys have, questions or whatever, if it's specific questions not really related to this specific point or whatnot, you can either drop it in the chat and we'll answer it later, or you can go ahead and just wait until we get into the Q&A towards the end of the session. But so the goal of this is to kind of give you guys a lot to chew on, so it's not going to be like a super deep dive on one specific topic. It's more of like, hey, these are all the big important things that you got to think about, and so it'll be pretty rapid fire with a lot of them, but yeah, we'll definitely be working on that. And if you have a specific question on that, do or don't, then drop it in the chat for sure, and we'll try to address it as we're going through, because like we said, each one of these topics, not each one, but most of them you can do a whole workshop on each one of them. So that's kind of the goals there and whatnot. But yeah, let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and start trying to share my screen here.
And yeah, this is recorded, and you guys will have access to this afterwards as well to kind of go through the notes, and you'll be able to pause on this presentation that Zach's about to roll into here as well. So no worries on that.
All right, can you guys see my screen now? I have no clue where things just went.
There we go. Yeah, I think you click chat. Yeah.
All right, we already got a Q&A. All right, guys, 1 second. I'm trying to get this rolling into the right spot. Oh, look at that. So looks like you guys can see our screen. Nice. Michael said, where do I find info on wheelchair passes ability in tiny house? Where do I find info on wheelchair passes ability? I'm guessing you mean like wheelchair access ability in a tiny house. Obviously, there's the ADA compliance, which requires a very specific, sizing and mobility and handrails and all of that sort of a thing as well. Let's see, I'm just going to click answer live, which is, something that you have to take into consideration if you're building a regular size home, or even like a mobile home or something like that you're trying to make it ADA compliant. But if you're building your tiny house as either like an RV certified tiny home or something else, or just you're not wanting it to be officially ADA compliant, but you're wanting it to be, you just want to make sure that somebody can get a wheelchair in there, I would definitely, make sure that you measure how wide a wheelchair is, measure what size you need to turn around and all that sort of information. But I'm not 100% positive on your exact question, so if I misunderstood your question, go ahead and do that.
Well, like Zach said, most of the time, builders or designers will design to the ADA compliance standards, and that that's kind of a national for the U.S. universal standard as far as openings and widths on things and turnaround spaces and all of the above. So
yeah, and Oh, let's see. Can you guys see my whole screen now? The whole screen now?
Was that out of the screen?
Okay,
Nice. Okay.
there we go. Let's see.
That's
I had
strange.
it. I had it slightly off my page, like off my window. So I've got another monitor over here. So if I'm looking over there, actually, well, yeah, if I'm looking over there,
That's why.
that's why. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do that right there, and oops, done.
Probably bring that to here if you want, but either way.
Yeah,
Cool.
cool,
Just getting organized.
awesome. Yeah, thanks, you guys. And let's see, there was one other question about the disability. Yeah, so as far as main floor bedroom and bathroom needs and whatnot, I would consider that more as like less of like ADA compliance and more of just convenience compliance, or I guess just more of like trying to design the home to work for either like elderly or somebody who isn't quite as mobile to just like climb a ladder into the loft and just work in super tight small spaces. So we have a little bit of that in here for you as well, and we can dive deeper into that, especially in the Q&A and whatnot. But yeah, we can just rock through it. So
Sweet.
all right, you guys. So the first, don't mislead yourself. In a small home, especially on a budget, you can't have everything. There's always a compromise. So figure out what you want and implement that. So something that we've had a lot of different clients come to us, they'll come to us and say, hey, I need this, that, and the other, and all these things or whatever. And like the thing A that they need is completely contradicting the thing B that they need, and they just can't do it. If you're in a regular size home and you have multiple different rooms, sure, you can make that happen. But in a smaller space, you just need to come to the table knowing that you're going to have some compromise. I mean, that's largely what life's about in general. You can't do everything, you can't have everything. So you have to learn, you got to compromise in some place. So that's one thing that we just like to start off with, because a lot of people don't have that good solid understanding, and they don't have realistic expectations from the get-go, which kind of throws a wrench in things later on down the road. So
And one of the ones we've seen most in this regard is, people come in and thinking they want this Taj Mahal master bathroom. And, one of the questions we always ask them is like, everyone loves a really fancy, nice bathroom, but if you consider the amount of minutes you spend in your bathroom every single day of your waking hours, it's a fraction of your waking hours. And so why would you just build out this bathroom in your tiny house that takes up 30% of your tiny house when it really only takes up about a tenth of your day? You only spend about a tenth of your day there. So if that, yeah, that's if you're kicking on the makeup like Zach, so uh so you just consider, sometimes it's easy just to break down your day into like, hey, how many minutes of my waking hours do I spend in each room or doing certain activities, and then breaking those into like spaces. And it's like, all right, then you'll be able to identify, as I spend the majority of my day in the living room, majority of my day in the kitchen, majority of my day here, and then build, design your tiny home, off of that.
And that's also how we like to help people identify how they should allocate their budget. Obviously, just for the whole shell and just for the general structure of a tiny house, it's going to cost a certain amount of money. You can do certain things to make it cost more or less. But in general, we're talking about more the inside finished fixtures and so on. People are like, how much should I allocate to the bathroom? How much should I allocate to the kitchen and to the living room and so on? And we like to say, well, like how much time do you spend cooking? If you're a chef and you want to spend a lot of time cooking, put more budget there. If you love taking baths and you just want to like have a really nice bath, put your money there. But if you don't cook and if you just like use the bathroom just simply as utility and you want to get in and out as fast as you can, then like don't worry about putting much money there unless you're trying to impress somebody, which is never going to make anybody happy. So that's one of our kind of tips. But I'm going to move on. All right, so do do you consider how often you'll move your tiny house and design your tiny house with this in mind? So some people come to us and they're like, hey, I want to make sure that this is really light, and I want to make sure that it's really towable, and I want to get a gooseneck, and I want to do all these different things, when they don't realize that in general, hopefully we're not freezing, but if we are, you guys just let us know. But In general, what we found is for the most part, people are only moving their tiny house once every couple of years. They're not moving it very often. And if you're not moving it very often, then don't put a bunch of money into making it easily movable. Don't put a bunch of time and energy into, designing it in a way, or figuring out how you can make it just ready to move on the go, because we've never found it just as easy. When you have an RV or something like that, it still takes some time to, like, get it ready and then get down the road. But when you have a tiny home, it takes probably 4 times longer than the standard RV or travel trailer out there to get it road ready. And we've, even with all of our kind of uh, move ready tactics that we figured out, it shaves a little bit of time, but the price always goes up, and then the convenience of when you're at a specific location goes down. So we've kind of found, just don't worry about moving your tiny home all the time. Don't worry about designing to that unless you actually plan to move it often and you have like a game plan to do that.
Yeah, like the first point, it kind of goes back to that. Don't fool yourself on that too. A lot of people have these grand visions of traveling, every single month, taking your tiny house to a new location, and if you look at the reality, oftentimes that just doesn't work out. Whether that's work, job, life, anything, So obviously, you want to be able to have these great goals and visions, but just think realistically too. That's where I think people get in trouble, is just like trying to do too much, and then you design your home around this kind of romantic lens view of what you think you'll be doing, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I'm actually not doing that, and I designed it kind of for the wrong purpose.
And so we had a question in the Q&A. What is considered move often? I think that really depends on a few different layers. Like, move often, if you're talking about like getting an extra wide load, and if you're going to move it once a quarter, like 4 times a year, I don't know if I necessarily would go extra wide if you're going to be moving it once a quarter. If you're going to move it once a year and you're doing a wide load, like, that's not a big deal. And so on. So it kind of depends on what feature of the tiny house we're talking about versus the move often, in my opinion. But some people, very few people actually have done the, like, I'm gonna travel with my tiny house, I'm taking on the road, kind of as if it's an RV. But that's pretty rare, and most of the time people are not doing it for the aspect of being able to travel. They're more doing it for the aspect of being, having the possibility of moving. And the whole thing is like, you can do that, but I wouldn't build your design around the possibility of moving, type of thing. So, and Renee asked if you can build a tiny house on a slab so it's permanent. Absolutely. You can build it on a slab or on a foundation or whatnot. There's a lot of different people who, are building them as, whether it's an ADU or just a cabin in the woods or whatever it is. There's a lot of different options there. So, yeah, you absolutely can build a tiny home that's on a foundation and you're not actually moving it ever. You can even have it a prefab where it's built elsewhere and brought on site and craned and put on the foundation and so on. So there's options there too. But some of these, most specifically like the traveling stuff, is obviously going to be more focused to like tiny homes on wheels. And so, how wide is wide? Elise is asking. 8.5 foot wide, so 8 foot 6 inches wide is the legal road width countrywide for America, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty close to that in Canada, and so on. So, and like Australia and so on, they obviously convert it into the metric system, but it's pretty similar to that. So if you're going to go wider than that, you generally are going to need a permit, but sometimes those permits, it depends. It's state by state at that point. Once you start going wider, you have to understand it's state by state, and you got to make sure that whatever state you're going to be traveling into, you're figuring that out. And probably the same across Canada. It's going to be probably most likely more state by state. And then you have to buy a permit for each state you're going to be going into for the wide load. But generally, those permits for wide load, if you go into like 10 foot or maybe even 12 foot wide, aren't very expensive. Sometimes they're like $20. Sometimes they're like $150. If you're doing that once a year, sure, it's money you don't want to spend, but the rest of the year you are living with literally an extra 20% living space, which makes a
Massive
big
difference.
difference. We've done a couple of our builds that were like a foot or 6 inches narrower than 8'6", just specifics that were the for the build, and it's just literally like it literally crushes the design and it crushes the usability of it. So that 8'6" really is like you don't want to go much smaller than that, but getting that extra foot and a half or 3.5 feet is like definitely can be pretty impactful for your specific use case and whatnot. So all right, let's move on to the next one. Do maximize your vertical space. So this is a fun one. So obviously everybody's probably heard of lofts in here. Most people, the average person is around, it's less than 6 foot tall. If you're really tall, maybe you're 6'6", but you're not really going to be using that space above your head, at least not the entire space. You don't want to feel so cramped all the time, but you don't need to have, 24 to 36 feet of space you can raise your hand and walk around everywhere. This isn't a roller coaster. So, utilize that extra vertical space, whether it's storage or sleeping and storage, whatever it is. There's a lot of space up there that you can, utilize, and it's not your constant 24/7 use, but maybe you sleep up there, or maybe you have a loft and you can close off the loft, which is a great way to hide extra stuff and so on, because staying organized, as we'll get to, is really important. So and then also know your plan as best you can for your tiny house. So there's different states that you actually can build to 14 feet tall, and also if you're even a state that's only 13'6", you can actually still move it on the road taller than 13'6". You can go to 14 or even taller, but you're just going to have to make sure that you route plan and that you buy a permit, which is more complicated than going wide. We always tell people it's easier to go wide than it is to go tall, but going tall can make a big impact and a big difference. Even that like 6 inches can make a big difference when you're in a loft that's 3 feet tall. If you can get that extra 3'6", that makes a big difference. So, cool. Yeah, so Barb's saying that $65 in Ontario, which is a steal of a deal for extra space, in my opinion. So, yeah, cool. There's a couple other things in there, but there are more comments, I think. So, cool. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. Yeah, I guess we kind of already talked about this one. Sorry, guys, I jumped the gun. But don't constrain yourself. Go wider. So just like Stacy said in the comment, her house is 11.2 foot wide, which is quite a bit wider than 8.5. So I'd love to hear, Stacy. Do you have your master on the main? Is your main bedroom on the main floor? All right. Do consider the resale. This is one that some people don't always take in consideration, but if you go too crazy in a specific direction, it's going to limit your resale opportunities. That doesn't always mean that you're going to lose more money on it, because sometimes we've seen somebody design a tiny house in a really crazy, unique way, and they happen to find the right buyer and they paid even sometimes more than they originally purchased the house custom for. And so if you can find the right buyer for what you're looking for, you can actually make more money, but you're also going to limit yourself. It's the whole supply and demand situation. If you don't have a buyer for what you're trying to sell, it makes it harder and you won't make as much money. Or
the more unique, the more custom, the smaller your pool of potential buyers becomes. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So, Sylvia had a question from the last page about how tall.
So yeah, Sylvia, 13 foot 6 inches is the legal road height in all of US. You got to be careful. There's a couple of places, most specifically on the West Coast, I believe, that it's actually, even though it's the legal width, there's some places that are like under that like, bridge overpasses and so on. So you still got to be careful. And obviously, there's different parking garages or like, fast food drive-through windows that are going to have things, so you can't just expect to be able to take it anywhere and everywhere. But 13'6" is the generally accepted standard for driving on the US highways and so on. Let's see. Oh yeah, number 6, don't overcomplicate it. There's a couple other slides in here that we have as well, but about like built-in furniture and so on. But we've had quite a few people come to us who are just like, they want to make this crazy contraption that does all these things and it uses the space in 10 different ways and so on. So we've never seen that work well. They end up not using it for any of the like use cases and so on. Um, for example, going back to our tiny luxury TV show, there's a couple of designs that we just did some crazy like automation and where you could like push a button and this table would come out and these chairs would come out and then this chandelier would slide over the top of it. Just didn't work well unless you have tons of money spent on engineering and you want to like design this thing to be like perfect for no reason. It's gonna always be, there's gonna be some constrained bottlenecks on it that won't make it as easy as you envision. And so this isn't a problem that everybody has, but some people do have this problem. And I see that we called it do, but it's actually don't overcomplicate it and do simplify it, I guess. So yeah, we don't have to spend too much time there, but it is definitely something that that can take away from the main purpose of going tiny. And another thing that we always like to tell people is like, I don't think I have a slide in here for this, but don't make yourself think that everything you want in your tiny house has to happen on day one. It's okay if you add in features later on down the road. So just thoughts there, especially like built-in furniture or some of that sort of stuff can be easier later on. This one, I can't remember what, this doesn't have the extra things. It was going to be, oh yeah, don't cheat. This one right here is don't cheat and use a storage unit if you need. What we've heard a lot of people is like, oh, if you're living tiny in a house, you can't have an extra like storage unit or you can't have like a storage shed outside of your tiny home. To us, we're like, like it's okay. Like you can definitely have a storage unit outside of your tiny house. So and we don't think it's cheating. We think that it's totally okay to, have a storage shed. Sure, if you can make it as similar and as close to your tiny house design as possible aesthetically, or hide it somewhere else on the property. But we've seen too often where people are turning their tiny house that once was their dream into more of like one of those trashy RV parks that just has stuff everywhere. That's the worst thing you could possibly do because it's taking away, that's not your tiny house dream. You wanted your house and you want to stay organized. And especially if you have more than just one person, you can't always expect to have to stay organized in such a small space. So if you need extra space for storage, like that doesn't mean that you're losing or that you're like cheating or whatever it is. Like do what works well for you and so on. So yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, she shed works if you need one of those. So you could get a she shed and then you could get the he shed. You could get two if you need to, or divide it, whatever works. Do consider custom built-in furniture often to utilize the space better. So there definitely is a level of custom furniture that is multi-purpose, but there's also just a level of utilizing the space better because sometimes a couch can have just way too much extra space that's taken up, or like a table or whatever it is can just take up too much space for what it actually the purpose of it is. So yes, sometimes that does help it look better, but at the same time, you can, if you do it simply, you can make some nice custom built-in furniture that actually looks really well. It looks really clean and it utilizes the space much better. So anything on that?
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, I think that's good.
Um, Helen's wondering what number 4 was. I can't remember what it was, but let me go back to it. Number 4 was don't constrain yourself. It was Helena. Let me. Yeah, it was just don't constrain yourself. Build wide if you need to for number 4. So number 8. Let's see. Oh, and then Elise is wondering about steps or ladder, which is better. We'll get to that, so don't worry.
You skipped number 8.
I don't know.
Oh,
Oh no,
you just closed out the presentation.
I did that, didn't I? That was crazy. It might have crashed though. All right, you guys. Sorry, 1 second. I'm pretty sure it just crashed my computer, but not completely. So you guys are still there, right?
In history, then, or no?
Yeah, probably, but it's also right here. Sorry, guys. 1 second. Oh, that totally crushed my flow.
It's all right. We'll get the flow back.
Yeah.
Here we go.
All right. Let's go here. Got it. And sorry, 1 second, guys. I think we're doing this.
Let's get the presentation back up. There we go.
There it is. You guys can see that? Let me know if you can see that. What's for dinner? Oh, I'm hungry.
I know. Now you're making me hungry. I don't know what's for dinner though.
All right, let's see here. I was scrolling through the slides and it just wham.
Yep, you did do it.
There we go.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's hit that.
Number 9.
All right, number 9. Do build yourself a nice outdoor living space.
That's right. Better do it. No, that's something, obviously, it depends on where you're at, but having outdoor space is absolutely game changer when it comes to living in a small space. So, even if you do have, rainy climates like we do here in the Pacific Northwest, just having some little space, whether you have a little umbrella or a little awning that you can roll out over your little deck or a little seating area, it makes a massive difference. Just being able to step outside, get that fresh air, have your senses kind of open up to a larger, more open space. Really, just I don't know, it just does amazing things for your mind and for just living day in and day out. So obviously, you can get as creative or as simple with this as possible. Like I said, we've done some crazy deck systems without tons of outdoor entertainment, or as simple as just a table and chairs with an umbrella. Just to don't neglect that though. It's an important side of it, and it can really make tiny living more functional and more enjoyable.
Yeah, and I'd also say is kind of going back to one of our earlier points of design and build based off of what your end goal is. If your end goal is to move all the time, then sure, you can have one of the like fold up awnings and decks and whatnot. But we've seen way too many people who are like, I'm gonna do this cool fold up deck and awning, when they never are as good as just a built-in in place like deck for your tiny house and an awning that you can put on. Sometimes the awning can be good depending on which awning, but the decks are always just going to be better. You're going to get a lot more space out of it and so on. Unless you're going to be traveling all the time, I would recommend just doing a deck once you get into your place. And that's something you can also do later on. Like I said, you don't have to expect to do that like day one. Either a deck or a patio or whatever it is or something like that.
That kind of answers Heather's question there. Have you ever built a deck with hinges that can fold up when you move? So like Zach said, we have done that quite a few times. And if the client or if they're really moving around a lot, it is nice to be able to have that deck with you. But it's never quite as stable as just a deck that you can set up on a nice foundation. And oftentimes we actually had clients after while doing that, that actually asked for more of like a deck system that they can basically maybe take down into two or three pieces, toss it in the back of a truck, whatever's pulling the tiny house, and then just pop that out, set it down when you're in your next location, and that also worked pretty well too.
Yeah, you can check out the tiny house tour that Minimaliste did at our last event back in September, and they had a pretty cool, actually like crank system that I can't remember if it's electric or whatnot, but it
Yeah,
raises
it
and
was.
lowers the deck. So that was pretty cool with the stairs and everything. It was pretty well done as far as like fold up deck. So go check that out for sure. Let's see, keep blazing through this. Um, don't build a box. I can't remember my one on this, but don't build a box. Get creative with how it looks, and realize that aesthetically, when you design your tiny house, if you try to go too crazy aesthetically, it's going to take away from the actual functionality of the tiny house. And so that's something that we encourage people to walk that tightrope there. Don't just build a box, but also make sure that the functionality of the tiny home is still on point, even if you do something unique and creative. Things like this where they cut the tiny house a little bit smaller, but they put the deck on there. That's a great way to possibly do that. But at the same time, I don't know how many people are going to be setting their chair on that deck when it's so small like this. When at the end of the day, you might just want to set the chair right outside your deck. But it does look cute and cool. But yeah, that's just something you're not saving much money doing, like cutting it shorter like this. So let's see. Um, do create a light and airy design. You want to make sure that it's not like dark and dingy and feels boxed in on the inside. Obviously some of the best ways to do that is light colors, windows, and just making sure that it feels open. You're not just segregating each and every single part of the tiny house, which will definitely make it start feeling a lot smaller, and closing yourself off. So
Yep.
and don't forget something that some people forget is it may be great on a nice bright sunny day, but think about, I mean, depending on where you live, like up in the northwest here, on a dark rainy day that gets dark at 4:30 like it is now, it's like that's not, you don't want to be in this closed off little room that you feel like, and if it's raining outside you can't just go outside and get some fresh air. You just don't feel like it's home at that point. So don't forget about the vertical space. There it is again.
Yeah, I think that one was specifically talking about interior. I guess yeah, that one was too. But yeah, use all that wall space, and obviously that takes up some spots for windows, and that's where you start using. If you're comfortable with them, skylights. Skylights are a whole different beast. You want to make sure they're very well installed, but yeah,
But they can bring a lot of light, and they can also
openness.
be a nice egress and make it feel open. So
Yep, yep.
yeah, Soren, that's kind of what I was mentioning. Like those little built-in tiny house patios. They're cute, but they're not functional. I mean, even if it's 3 foot deep, the average chair is gonna be close to 2.5 feet. And so if you try to stand up at the edge of it, your toes are hanging off the
Yeah.
deck there, and for the most part, that's not super convenient. Um, yeah, don't forget your priorities. You want to make sure that when you're designing your tiny house, you are keeping in mind what your must haves are, what your nice to haves are, and what your needs are, and make sure that you don't design and put something in priority over something else. And what is something that you can't live without? If it's a bathtub, then you just got to design that bathtub in there. But if it's not a bathtub, then don't worry about putting a bathtub in there. So don't forget your priorities as you're designing, which goes a long ways if you're wanting to be mobile ready, or if you're wanting it to be just a guest house or a short-term rental, or if you're wanting it to be your long-term residency or place that you live. if it's going to be your long-term place that you want to live, make sure you have plenty of storage and you think through, what items am I going to need to store? Do you have a small bin of Christmas stuff, or whatever it is? Do you have winter clothes and summer clothes? Like, find a place to put that, or just expect that you're going to need a shed. And if it's going to be a short term rental, then make sure that you don't waste a bunch of space on storage, because people don't often use the storage when you go and stay somewhere for a night or two. You're not going to need long term storage. So you want it to be very functional and attractive and show really well on photos, and highlight the scenery around it. And if it's going to be facing towards something beautiful, make sure windows are over there. So don't forget to design based on around your priorities. So, and stay organized. Or do stay organized. That's pretty important. It's key to success in a tiny house. We've seen too many people who are not thinking through what it takes to be organized in a tiny house in their design phase. And so then when it comes time to live in it, their stuff is just spread out. Like for me, it's very specific. I have, I guess, systems of where I put things. So I always try to put my car keys in the same place. I like to, organize my clothes in a certain way, and I have my bigger, thicker coats somewhere else. And I like to put my shoes that I use all the time in one spot, and the shoes that I don't use very often, I tuck them away. So they're not just like ready use right there. So make sure that you are thinking through the design. So if you have two pairs of shoes that you use all the time, then have a nice little cubby that's right by the door that you can always put your shoes there, or some sort of basket or something that you're going to expect to put your shoes in right there. And but if you have like four other pairs that you're going to hide away, then go make sure that you have a nice spot that those can live long term. Thinking through what your items are that are going to come with you into the tiny home is really important when you're talking about organization and when you're talking about storage for the stuff, because so many people, they come to us and like, oh, I'm gonna want a storage closet here, and I'm gonna want a cubby here, and I'm gonna want my clothes there, or whatever it is. But they're not like quantifying how much space is gonna need in each of those. Sometimes they over allocate space to a certain thing and they under allocate for another thing and whatnot. So that's definitely, it's important to think through the organization phase as if you live there already. What are you bringing with you? What stuff do you need to put in a specific spot to make sure that you can stay organized as you go through? So
Yeah, an organization is just such an important part to living in a small home and living anywhere, but especially in a small home. It just compounds all those little decisions, all those little things that you do throughout your day, compound to either a clean or a messy tiny house. And obviously, a messy tiny house is gonna make you stressed and uncomfortable, and it's not going to be something you're proud of and something you're enjoying. So we always try to abide by like the 2 minute rule. If it takes less than 2 minutes to do it, just do it right then. If that's washing a dish, putting away something, returning it to its rightful spot, just take that extra moment to go and do that right now, and that'll save you time, energy, brain power, whatever it is later on. And so definitely something to consider. And like it's obviously been said before, but if your house is messy, it's typically going to kind of make your mind messy too. You're not going to be thinking as clearly. You're just, we call it like open loops. You want to close as many open loops as possible. An open loop can be anything in the back of your mind that you're thinking about that you need to do later. And so that might be take out the trash, or organize this, or clean the bathroom, or do whatever it is. The more of those you have subconsciously in your mind, the more cluttered your mind is, the more slow it's going to work, and the more stressed you're going to be. And you might not even realize that that's what it is. But just to be able to close those loops and keep organized, and be efficient in that way is important in life, but also that much more important in a tiny house, to do it successfully.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Don't create a tiny home that doesn't fit your design taste, but don't forget that aesthetics don't always produce the most functional tiny home. I think I already covered this one a little bit, but yeah, definitely we've seen people who are just, like we said earlier, building a box and it doesn't actually produce a functional, or that produces a functional tiny home, but they're not actually getting a tiny house that they're proud of. When you're going tiny, you have to make sure that you're proud of your decision going tiny. So you want it to look good, you want it to be nice, but you don't have to, uh, sell an arm and a leg to just make it perfect. It's just got to be, it's got to look good enough to not just be trashy, but it's also most importantly got to be functional because you're the one who's going to live in it. You're the one who has to live with the functionality of the tiny home. So,
So don't sacrifice functionality for aesthetics, basically.
don't use hallways if you can avoid it. Hallways are just a waste of space. There's too many tiny homes that just have a hallway of space that you can't really do anything with because it's always got to be open and available for you to move through it, which is the point of a hallway. But if you think about it, in any house, any regular house, the point of a hallway is to get to the next location. You can't really store stuff in there. You can't really utilize it for like an office desk or anything like that. You're not really going to be spending time in that hallway. So it's kind of like the bathroom. Don't allocate a whole bunch of space to your bathroom if you're trying to spend as little time as possible in it. Most people try to spend as little time as possible in hallways, which means avoid them if you can. One thing that we like to recommend is avoiding built-in solar systems if possible. We've seen a lot of great, especially over the last few years, there's some really cool like solar generator setups that are much more of like plug and play. You can get the generator, battery, the battery pack, and the inverter, and then you get the solar panels, and the solar panels plug into the battery pack and inverter, and that just plugs right in. And those are generally called like solar generators. Those have been on the rise, and they're pretty affordable. Some of the main reasons why we like to recommend this is because they're easy to upgrade, they're easy to sell off if you no longer need them, they're easy to um, uh, get warranty on them, all of that sort of stuff. You don't have to worry about your actual technical techniques of getting it to work and so on. It's a lot more plug and play, and if it doesn't work, then it's generally a manufacturer warranty issue. Whereas when you are installing a whole solar system, it'll generally go back on the installer, and if that's not you and if it's a different company, the installer's not just going to quickly take responsibility for it. And even so, if they're a long ways away from where you are at, it's not going to be easy to get them to come repair it. So multiple reasons. And you also don't, if you don't need the solar system, then you don't need to buy it up front. You can always get it later, and vice versa. If you want to sell it later on, then you can sell it, because the worst thing you can do is have a solar system sitting around for years not being used, and then all of a sudden try to use it 5 years later. It's not going to work very well. It's going to be outdated technology. You're not going to be stoked with that decision. So do design for your end use case. Got that.
We've talked about that one a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, here's just a quick tip that I like to throw at you. Don't put a refrigerator at the end of a kitchen cabinet run. Too many people will have the front door right here, and then the kitchen's over here, and they'll put the fridge right here. So you walk in the front door, and what are you looking right when you turn this way? It's just this big blank fridge wall right there. Not a great option. So don't do that if you can avoid it. Always try to tuck them away. The tricky part is when you have to start dealing with the wheel wells in a tiny house. When you have to deal with the wheel wells, you will either need to elevate the fridge if it's going to go on top of one of those, or try to get it further one way or the other. So yeah, definitely avoid fridges making them cut off the room, and nobody likes looking at the side of a fridge. So
And sometimes this means specifically on the end of a kitchen run that has open space on the other side of it. Sometimes the kitchen will run into a wall, and having the fridge kind of right here and cabinets, that obviously makes good sense. But where the cabinets kind of end and there's just open space, having a fridge here does not make sense. So
yeah, and also don't put the fridge right next to a stove, like an oven, a stove top. We've seen too many people put a fridge right next to the stove top. A, you're just literally heating up your fridge, and B, oftentimes pans will stick out a little bit past the edge of the stove, which is just how it works generally. And A, you're going to be bumping up against the fridge, or B, you can melt your fridge if you're not being smart about it. So don't forget ventilation. Yeah, make sure the bathroom is well ventilated for moisture and smells. You want to make sure that in a small space like this, you're not confining yourself to uh, I guess there can be all kinds of moisture issues, and if left unchecked, it can be a way bigger issue than just a small, just a big house. Like with a big house, if there's mold over in that corner over there or wherever you have mold, it's not going to be nearly as big of a problem if you are living in a small space and the mold is 5 feet from your face while you're sleeping. So
And in general, because the bathrooms are typically smaller, that condensation really builds up quicker on the walls. There's obviously less surface area for it to spread out, so it becomes, more moist in a smaller area, which will lead to obviously more water damage.
and don't just think that ventilation is exclusively for bathrooms. You can also, obviously, kitchen ventilation is great for, like a range hood or whatnot, but also you can have ventilation elsewhere. It's not a terrible thing, and there's some really cool air exchangers, so you don't actually lose either heat or cool through these air exchangers. It's a great way to go. We recommend wrapping your house and making it super tight, airtight, and then getting one of these air exchangers, so that way you're not losing energy. It's very eco-friendly, but you also still get the fresh air. So don't overcrowd with decor. Some people just put way too much stuff in a tiny home, whether it's decor or things. When you overcrowd with decor, it just detracts from the entire space. So design your tiny house to where it's attractive enough that it doesn't need a bunch of stuff everywhere. And generally, people use a picture or something like that to cover up a bare wall or whatever and make it look a little more appealing. But with a small space, there's less of that. So don't think that you need a bunch of decor. If you do like photos and you're a photo person, you're trying to design your tiny home, make sure that you are being very deliberate with how you're planning that into the tiny house, and probably not going to be able to take every single one of your tiny homes. So
Yeah, I think just in general, one of the biggest mistakes people make for designing and decorating is they just add too much in there, and so oftentimes people look at something like, oh, I think we're good, there's nothing left to add, and that's typically the wrong mindset. Typically you want to look at a design in the sense of, is there nothing left to take away? And so when you're at the point where there's nothing left to take away and it's exactly what it needs to be without being anything more, that is typically where that sweet spot is, in design. And so, that's obviously kind of the whole having what you need, not nothing, having everything you need, nothing that you don't. And so, I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind, because it's so easy to overcrowd your tiny house, especially, and over design it. And so just keeping things simple is usually better. Complexity is the killer of all things good, in our opinion. So keep things simple, and that usually leads to a nice, clean, fresh design.
cool. Do consider privacy. This is one that some people don't think of. If your home's going to be positioned a certain way, I like to call it the fishbowl effect. If you have a window at the end of your tiny home and it's facing your neighbor's house right in their living room or whatever, you're never going to be able to get away from their direct view. You're going to have to put a blind there, or you're going to have to, be back inside the closed off bathroom or something like that to get away. Fishbowl effect is real. You want to make sure that you aren't constantly in the line of sight from no matter where you are in the tiny home. I know you can't avoid that always and exclusively. And if you're in like a tiny home like this one and the end is designed like that, like that's obviously very specific for a specific orientation of the home, to where you're not just facing it right up against a blank wall of the neighbor's house, or you're not just facing it directly into somebody else's home. You want to make your design work with where you're going to put it. If you have a beautiful view out one way that's rolling hills and not a bunch of houses and stuff like that, make it all windows, and the fishbowl effect won't really happen because it's just going to be trees looking at you. So, all right. And consider custom tiny house plans. Um, Obviously, you can either, this is in the design phase. So if you're looking at design, you can either just go to a builder and get a standard design, something, one of their models, or you can buy some plans online that are actually, just available. They're generally going to be quite a bit cheaper. So that is something to consider, is your budget and so on with all of it. But something that we do heavily take into consideration is that this tiny house has to work well for you. And if it doesn't work well for you, you're not going to enjoy the decision that you made to go tiny. And that might, mean some different changes here and there, but you can also sometimes customize those pre-designed tiny house plans and whatnot. We also do recommend getting your, if you are going to go the custom route, getting your custom tiny house plans designed before you select your builder, just because sometimes if you select a builder and have them design the tiny house, well, you don't know what you're going to get, first of all. Second of all, you don't really even know the full length of the price until later on. And also, if you are if you are wanting to compare apples to apples, if you don't have an actual design, like if you don't have your plans fully figured out, you're just going to go to a designer and you're going to tell them your list of must-haves. You're going to go to your builder and tell them your list of must-haves. You're going to go to builder B and tell them your list of must-haves. Those can be two completely different tiny homes. Yeah, sure, it's got probably the main items in it, but the whole actual physical tiny home at the end of the day is going to be so different. So you want to make sure that you don't just lock yourself into a builder before you know what the actual design is going to be. And you can also probably get a better price. Builders are gonna, even if it's free design, they're still gonna have to cover their costs. So they have to put that in somewhere. They have to cover their design costs. They're not getting it designed for free. Even if they're the one designing it, it still costs them time, and nobody works for free. That's just the way that life is. And so you're gonna pay one way or the other. We generally recommend getting your design done, so that way you know it's exactly as you want it, and then take it to a builder, and they're not going to be able to pull the whole upcharge on you or the change order on you. It's going to be a lot more streamlined, and you're not going to have to worry about people, the builder. Yeah, I guess you're going to just be able to compare apples to apples so much better. So that's one thing that we like to tell people, is make sure that you take that into consideration. Now, there are quite a few builders out there that are really good at design, and they do a great job at it, and they have a good reputation and so on. We're not steering you away from doing that, but we do recommend or we do tell you that, like, builders aren't necessarily in the design business, they're in the building business. And if you bring them a design, then they probably can give you a way more accurate price up front, because they won't do a design generally for free, and so you're going to pay one way or the other. So let's see. Yeah. So obviously that's a great sales pitch right into that. We offer custom designs, but we do offer custom designs. And if you are interested in custom designs, we are more than happy to help. We love designing people's tiny homes. We view it as the key to kind of really making their dreams come true, because without a design, might not end up getting the actual tiny house that they're wanting. No pressure on using us. There's quite a few other designers too, and if you're looking into a custom design, we're more than happy to point you into any of our other plethora of contacts we have for custom designs. But if you are looking for custom designs, you can check it out here. And um, we like to say that we're pretty middle of the road as far as design goes. We're not the most expensive, but we're not cheap, like cheap, like like crazy cheap. But we're middle of the road as far as design goes. We actually, when we've gone to most of our other designers, they haven't been able to beat our pricing. So there's that, but at the same time, we're not.
You can find it cheaper, but you just got to be careful of what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's people that will say they design tiny homes, but they never have designed one before. And so you just got to be aware of what you're doing. Look for people that you can vouch for, and maybe other builders or other people in the community can vouch for them. Like Zach said, we're priced pretty competitively, I would say, but we also don't just give them away because it takes a lot of our time and effort and our team's time and effort, and we want to be proud of what we're doing, proud of the tiny homes we create, and we want to give each one of our clients the attention they deserve, and that equals that comes with costs on our end. And so I think that's kind of the answer to that one. But
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like Jason said, we like to, or I guess Jason didn't necessarily say this, but I'm going to say it. We like to make our plans to where they're DIY friendly. So a lot of plan sets out there, they don't include all the things that are really important. And we like to, when we do the designs, we take the extra steps to make sure that it's really well done and it's actually understandable. And we're also real human support. So if you need actual like to answer questions or if whatever it is, we're flexible with that stuff too. So we love being able to help people bring their dreams to life, and that's the part that we absolutely love about tiny homes. And like Jason said, we were building tiny homes for a long time. We built over 100 of them, but quite frankly, we got burned out on working 60-hour weeks. Just literally, it was no longer fun building tiny homes like that when we're just trying to crank them out, and it was a whole operation, and we're managing like 50 employees and so on. It was no longer fun. But the fun part was designing tiny homes, working with a client who has a vision, and bringing that vision to life is so much fun for us. And we've obviously got the best of both worlds, where we have the direct experience of what it takes to build a tiny home and the tips and tricks to build a tiny home better, faster, and more stronger and secure and so on. And so that's kind of where we like to blend our experiences there and hone it in on design and design them in a way to where it's understandable, and you can actually, anybody can build a tiny home off of our plan set. So
yeah, and one more thing on that too, going just thinking about advice would give to someone looking for custom tiny house plans. Again, like Zach said, you don't have to go with us. We're not trying to hard sell you this. We're trying to present an opportunity, an option here. But if you are looking for someone else to do custom tiny homes, you really want to make sure that they have an understanding of physical building. And so I would say that's probably one of the biggest kind of hidden downfalls in designers, that a lot of people go contract into a tiny house plan set or a home plan set in general with a designer that has never been on the field swinging a hammer, knowing exactly how to build a house. And so you end up with these designs that when you give them to your builder or go to do it yourself, you're like, this does not make any physical logical sense. Like, you literally can't do this, and it's because they've never been in the field doing it. And that's something that we've found that can be kind of a big hiccup there. So make sure that if you're going with a designer for your custom plans, make sure they have extensive experience working with a builder and can be vouched for in that sense, or they have actual experience building. Otherwise, they can come up with some things that might look good on paper, but just don't actually work in the real world.
which is something that builders, like Soren said, builders aren't designers, but builders have that real world in the field experience that gives them a leg up in that part of the design. But they also are going to understand, like, hey, if I do it, if I cut this corner, if I don't quite do this, or if I like kind of present this a little bit differently, it'll be easier and cheaper for me, so I'm going to do that. And there's other things that they can do. I'm not saying that every one of them do that, but there are different tactics that can be used to where the client doesn't quite get their end dream and goal because the builder either didn't quite have the design technique or wanted to build it a specific way. Whereas we like to blend it, and when we're designing, like, we have no leg in the actual build now, so we just design it to our clients' dreams and goals, and we also bring to them the understanding, like, hey, if you do this, it's gonna cost more, or if you do this, it's gonna take a little longer to build, and that sort of a thing as well, and whatnot. And I see Kay here as well. Kay, I agree. Human support is very important. And another thing that we like to do, Kay's with Precision Temp, and we like to hook up our actual design clients with as many sweet deals as we can. So and we specifically specify products that we can stand behind, just like Precision Temp. And we generally always have a sweet deal with Precision Temp. So if you go with us, we can hook you up with that too. So um, let's see. I did promise that we talk about stairs and ladders, and I see that my slide must have not gotten in here. So stairs versus ladders. It's an important topic. Tons of people talk about it. I would say first figure out what your end use case is. Who's going to be living in this tiny home? Is it somebody who is a 10-year-old or an athlete, like Soren says, and they can just bounce up and down those ladders? Or is it somebody who's going to be a little bit more like needing to have stairs, or maybe they're building this for the next 15, 20 years and they're 50 years old and they still want to be able to get up to the loft when they're 70, then I would consider stairs. There's a lot of different stairs that you can use. There's some that are, either multi-use and, you can like fold them up and different things like that. You can also consider things like partial stairs. What about stairs that go, 3/4 of the way down, and then you have a much smaller ladder that you can set there that helps you get up into the first steps there, or maybe you just have a climb at the very beginning to where you start off, and so on. Ladders, they can be great. The things that I love about ladders is that if you have two lofts, all you need is one ladder and you can go back and forth. Unless they're both sleeping lofts, then you kind of do need to have multiple ladders and so on. That's one of the things with ladders, is that once you are not using them, you have to make sure that you have a place to store them. And that's what people don't really think about that often, is you're not generally design it in. You're not generally just going to leave the ladder there all the time, because then it's almost worse than stairs. You might as well just have had stairs if it's going to sit there all the time. But most of the time, because the ladders have to be at an angle like this, then when you stand it straight up and down, you can't fit it on the short side of the tiny house, which is something that most people don't realize, is that the ladder actually can sometimes be taller than the shortest side of the tiny home if you have a shed roof and so on. So you definitely want to make sure that you are taking all of those things into consideration. You actually have a place to store the a place to store the ladder, but also a place that is easily accessible if you're going to be sleeping up there or using it often, which is the tricky part. I love the idea of ladders, but I don't always love the practicality of ladders, because it's not always as easy as you think. So, um, yeah, Tarzan like rope that just pulls you up and down. That'd be pretty nice. We've also loved the idea of, and then the problem with two lofts is, and if you're trying to do stairs, you generally can only get. I mean, we've done it a few times where you have two sets of stairs going up, one to each loft, but that takes up so much space. So if you're trying to do stairs, we generally recommend, hey, which is the main loft that's going to be used? Do the stairs up to that. And if you have a secondary loft, then you're doing some sort of ladder system for it, maybe one that tucks away, or possibly one that can come from the first set of stairs or something, so you're not having to go the full length. It's just partial ladder. Or is there a way to connect the two lofts? We've done catwalks, or we've done like rope nets between the two lofts, so that way you can climb the stairs up there, and then you can use a rope and you crawl across the rope to get to the other loft. Different options like that. Obviously, again, it's all end user and specific use case for the two lofts. So stairs versus ladders, it's 100% opinion based of who's going to be using it and who's going to be and how you're going to use the lofts. Pros and cons each way. You just have to understand the pros and cons. Yeah, that's kind of the general, probably big picture I'd say about ladders and stairs, unless you had something else.
Yeah, that's great. That's spot on.
Yeah, Ike, if you have the link to the collapsible, retractable ladder, that'd be super cool if you were able to share it or email us a picture after this. We'd love to share it because there are lots of great options for different types of ladders and things like that. Um, you just have to know that you like how you're going to use it and so on. Um, So, Stacy, part of that is because I think in New Zealand they have a little bit taller ceilings, or you specifically might be thinking about that one that like the ceiling raises on it. Um, the standing up in the bedroom, you only have 13'6", and because the trailer is generally at least 2 feet, you're down to basically 11 feet. But then you have to consider like the thickness of the framing at the top and thickness of the loft and so on. So you generally only have about uh, 10 feet of space, 10 feet of actual space in the tiny house, maybe 11 feet, but then you got to split that up. And if the average person is, 5.5 or 6 foot, they're not going to be able to fully stand up anywhere. So, what about the scale of stairs? I'm not positive on what you mean by scale of stairs, but
Probably just means like, like a typical staircase in a house is usually like,
oh,
your tread is 9-ish inches and then it goes up around 6 or so inches. And a tiny house, yeah, oftentimes you'll have those steps kind of bigger. So you step up higher each time, which at the end of the day makes the staircase run shorter. So it's not stretching out into your house as much. Um, and so, yeah, that's typically what people will do. And usually above like 10 inches to 12 inches of a high step, it really starts becoming uncomfortable, so you got to consider that. But yeah,
yeah,
exactly, rise
the
and run.
rise and run are generally much larger in a tiny house, just because you can cramp the stairs into much smaller, or cram the stairs into a much smaller space. So, um, let's see, we can start going through these. I guess at this point we'll open up to Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, definitely start dropping them in now. If you can use the Q&A function, that helps us keep the Q&A a lot cleaner, but whatever you'd like. I'm gonna read through some of these questions over here, and then I'll try to get to some more. So,
I think you kind of answered that one already.
okay, okay. The challenges of securing home insurance. So for tiny home insurance, we actually have done some different workshops and different recordings. Like at a past event, we had an insurance expert who came in and spoke about tiny house insurance. There's a few different good options for tiny home insurance. We would definitely recommend double checking it all, because a lot of people are just insuring them as RVs, and the problem with an RV is that you can't legally live in them for more than 49% of the year, which means that if the insurance company finds out that you're living in it full time and it burned down or something like that, there's a good chance they won't pay out. They do anything and everything they can to not pay out on insurance, and so you just double check the fine lines there. And the person who spoke at our past event did have the ability to live in it full time. So um modular kitchen. So Beth asked, what about modular kitchen? What about modular type kitchen, movable parts? Is it doable? So that it is doable. You can have all kinds of different functions like that. The couple of things I'd say is a lot of times the cabinets are just dead storage, and it's just storing stuff that you need at some point in time. You can't really make that space go away, because you need that space for storing your kitchen utensils and so on, and pots and pans and whatever it is. But as far as like just kind of the general moving parts and stuff, it does get, as soon as you start dealing with any water or electricity and draining, it starts getting a lot harder doing anything movable. And then kind of going back to one of our other points is just like keep it simple if you can. We found that complicating stuff never ends up with a better, or not never, but more often than not, it's just too much work than it's worth. So uh, I would just say you can definitely do it, but just be careful. And yeah, it doesn't always work the way that you plan. So, um, do you have to meet local building codes? So that's a really good question there, Barb. So it completely depends on how you're wanting your tiny house certified. You can have your tiny house certified to local building codes, and we've done a lot of those designs. Those are going to be much more likely on, excuse me, on like a foundation or on a slab, or a fixed permanent tiny house that's excuse me, built to local building codes. You're gonna get it permitted, and it's gonna be permanently fixed there, or at least more or less permanently fixed there. Um, if you're building it to RV code, you're gonna go through like Pac West or through RVIA, something like that, and those are the codes that you're going to build it to, and it's like the ANSI standards. If you're going to go like a park model, then you can still go through at least Pac West, I think ANSI too, or I mean I think RVIA as well too. And you can, that's going to be its own set of standards. So like the building codes is like the ANSI standards. At that point you have to build it to that specific ANSI standard. And then there's also the like things like NOAA certification. Some types of NOAA certification are not like a governmentally recognized certification. It's more of just kind of like a blanket, it's more of just like a unregistered certification where they are certifying that it's safe and it's meeting certain building standards and whatnot, but it's not necessarily going to be recognized by a jurisdiction or like by the government if you try to do a certain thing or whatever, which is where tiny homes are in a gray area anyways, because if you tiny homes on wheels that are being built to the RV standard are in a gray zone specifically, because even though they're being built to those standards, a lot of people are kind of saying like, well, they're for a different use case, and people are trying to live in them full time. Therefore, like it still shouldn't be approvable, basically. Even though tiny homes that are built to the ANSI standards, just like an RV, are generally 10 times more eco-friendly, a lot better with utilities, and it's way more insulated and all of that, and safer all around. They still are just kind of putting it into this area where they're not super pro it, and that's why there's a few different organizations that are on the rise that are creating a more accepted across the board building. I guess specific jurisdictions are accepting them more often, which is great. Do we design container homes? Yes, we've designed some container homes. We've designed some like semi trailers, done one of those, and so on. So let's see, buying a pre-owned. So Suzanne is just saying, Suzanne, I'd say email us about that. She's asking, she's trying to buy a pre-owned tiny home that we built, which is super cool actually. But yeah, I would just say email us about it and we can dive more into that. We're not actually doing any remodels or building or anything like that. But email us and we'll gladly chat about it. So um, best practices when choosing a builder. That is, wow, that's a big question. We could do a whole workshop on that alone. And yeah, I mean, best practices, get referrals, get client testimonies, and make sure that they're legit clients and so on. Make sure that you're not going with a builder who's never done it before. Um, yeah, there's a steep learning curve for builders building tiny homes, and anybody and their mom thinks they can just go build a tiny home and sell them, but it's not the case. For DIY, it's totally fine because those people just they're not doing it as fast and they're not trying to make money on it per se, and so they put in the time to do it. And anybody can build a tiny home like that in that sense. But as far as like a builder, I would be very careful and we're actually hosting a builder expo in January, and we're bringing a handful of reputable builders there. So, I would recommend doing that. And obviously, at the end of the day, you never know. The biggest kind of problem with tiny homes in the industry is like the skis balls who are just taking people's money and running. And then the other side of it is companies that are going under, they're going bankrupt just because that's basically what happened when cars came out. There's a bunch of different car companies, and a few of the car companies bought basically all the other car companies, or the other ones went bankrupt because it's a whole new industry, so much getting figured out and so on. So that nobody can predict that as far as like if a company's going to go under. So we do our very best to only portray builders that we can stand behind, and that's what we try to do. So um, yeah, we can design plans for container homes. Do we recommend NOAA for certification? It really depends, Doug. It depends on what your end use case is. Um, uh, yeah, it really depends on your end use case, but at least you know it's safe. And if you're trying to resell your tiny home or something like that, the people who are buying it know it's safe. So that's kind of like the our main thing is when anybody's asking to if they should buy a used tiny house, we always say make sure you only buy a certified tiny house. So um, John's asking if you can just buy the shell of a tiny house and finish it out. Yes, absolutely. There's quite a few different builders that do that, such as like TrailerMade's doing a lot of that right now. So, um, Zoe, I'm not positive what you do. You know what you meant
Yeah,
by? Oh,
I think she's just meaning kind of like how we were talking, like, you might like the look of it, but to actually live in it and to, see how functional it is. Zoe was asking, like,
oh,
she didn't have tiny house communities near her. How could she suggest? How would we suggest trying out different styles? While taking in consideration, your preference to aesthetics and design versus like functionality. So, I think if you don't have anywhere near you, that is a challenge. That's usually our biggest thing. Is just like, hey, find some tiny homes near you that you can go and stay in for a night or two. I would look on like things like Airbnb or VRBO, Zoe, because oftentimes you'll find kind of one-offs around that you can kind of go stay in. That maybe it's not the exact one you're wanting to stay in, but it could be close. So even if there's not a community nearby, usually I think there's enough on a lot of those platforms that you can find usually one within an hour's drive, hour or two drive of most places. So
and I'd say also check out some different RVs and travel trailers. That's a great way to just kind of get familiarized with the space and so on. And then also, like Lizzie says, take a road trip. If you're seriously considering this big of an acquisition, like that's a pretty big purchase, buying a tiny house, putting a small percentage of that into making sure that you're getting one that's right for you and you get a fun trip out of it is, in my opinion, a no-brainer. I like to travel. So how do you find a place to put your tiny home? Here in the southeast, most places have a 1,200 square foot minimum. Renee, that's probably maybe is that 1,200 square foot minimum for like a park model, or a mobile home, or are you talking like for something attached to a foundation? I think if it's just on wheels, you'll have an easier time figuring out. You can also, some people live in the gray zone. If it's an RV, they just go park it in somebody's places. If they're living in an RV on somebody's property, few different options like that as far as finding a place to put your tiny home. You can look for communities in the place, like in the southeast. There's quite a few different communities. I don't know your specific location, but there's quite a few there too. So, um, Doug says custom tiny home trailers versus utility trailers. Well, are there many custom builders to choose from? So, first of all, I would personally never build it on a utility trailer. They're just not designed as strong. You're just going to struggle with it, whether it's not to the right width and you're going to now build it only 8 foot wide. That extra 6 inches makes a big difference. Or if it doesn't have enough axles, like we recommend at 24 foot switching to three axles, triple axles on anything 24 foot and above, and different things like that. uh, so I mean, I wouldn't do it on a utility trailer. People have done it obviously, but it's that's also like the foundation. And one, I like to look at it this way: it's almost impossible to replace the trailer underneath it. So think about it like that. Will that trailer last you forever? Because if the trailer goes bad on it, that's it. So, and then, are there many custom builders to choose from? There definitely are some good custom builders out there still. There's quite a few of them, whether it's up in Canada or I'm not sure where your exact location is, but there's some on the West Coast, some on the East Coast. There's quite a few. There's some in Texas and so on. So there's tons of them. As far as like the good ones, that's where it starts getting a little bit more picky. But yeah, there's definitely some good options out there. So
And I think we've mentioned this before, but we've seen people make the mistake of, hey, this builder that I would really like to go with, that I know is reputable and has a really good track record, is not in my state. It's out of my states, maybe halfway across the United States, and maybe it's going to take another couple $1,000s to get the tiny house to you when it's done. So instead of going with that route, they'll say, it's too far away. I'm gonna find someone local and go with someone that's really close to them, but that has no track record, and that almost always ends up being a bad decision. Basically, we would always recommend, hey, you going with the right builder, a really reputable builder that's out of state, over someone that has no track record that's close to home. At the end of the day, even if you have to eat an extra $1,000 or $2,000 in delivery fees, that's well worth that in our mind, of peace of mind, and the knowing you're going to have a proper tiny house. And oftentimes that those reputable builders, they can work it into the deal too. You can negotiate it, whatever it is. So yeah, don't skimp on that. Make sure you get a good builder, even if they're a little bit further away.
yeah, all right, I'm just going through. So we got another question here that's definition of a park model versus tiny house on wheels. So technically, tiny house on wheels is not a it's not like a defined thing. It's not a certified thing. So it's not like a specific set of standards or building codes, or it's just more or less like a tag name that people call it. It's like a tiny house on wheels or whatever, but it doesn't actually mean something. Whereas a park model is very specific. It's a specific ANSI code that it has been approved by. And so, different things like park model communities will allow them in, but they won't allow other things in, and so on. So it's different. It's similar, but slightly different than the ANSI code, ANSI standard that RVs, that travel trailers are approved by. So it's like 119.2, ANSI 119.2, and versus ANSI 119.1 or something like that. I think I'm blanking on the final point number, but it doesn't really have to do with the size of the home, Soren. Park models do have a specific size of homes that they need. Like that's part of their standards. They have to fit within a certain size, and then over a certain size, then it starts going into like HUD's jurisdiction. and that's no longer ANSI code. That's like HUD's jurisdiction, and that's very specific. You don't want to mess around with getting that wrong, and you have to be approved for it and everything like that. Whereas a tiny house on wheels, I mean, technically like a mobile home, a HUD approved mobile home is a tiny house on wheels, and so is a 8 foot wide by 20 foot long tiny house on wheels that's not certified as a tiny house on wheels. It's just kind of like a saying for like a car. Like, oh, that's a car, but like, is it a sedan or is it a truck or is it a SUV? What is it? So like park model would be much more like, oh, it's an SUV, whereas like tiny house on wheels would be more like, oh, it's a car type of thing. So um uh yeah, we built on a deck over trailer barb. What we found is they're higher up, so you lose a little bit of space, but they're not like crazy higher up, but they are definitely a little bit higher up to where. And then the other tricky part is the axles underneath it aren't generally as big, and you need more of them, and it's not necessarily like the world's best thing. But if you are going extra wide, if you're going to go over the 8'6", you're generally going to end up oftentimes building on a deck over because um, you don't want wheel wells in the center of your house. So, and the axles don't generally get bigger than the 8'6" mark. So even like a mobile home or something like that, their axles are still 8'6", even if the house is 15 feet wide. So, all right, we're gonna try to scroll through these here, and then we're also running out of time. We're supposed to be doing a community.
Yeah, I should just wrap up these Q&As here.
Yeah, yeah. Um, all right, let's see. Yeah, I think we're probably gonna have to wrap up because we're gonna jump into the community meet and greet. So this is the time where you guys can all jump in and just kind of share what part of the tiny house journey you're on, and just yeah, chat about it. Talk amongst yourselves. It's one of our most frequently asked for kind of things that people love to do. Part of our community is just this kind of meet and greet and community meetup. And so we like to host them every now and then, and it's a time where you guys just get a chat. I don't know if we're gonna cut it off at a certain time. I think we'll try to let you guys. It was supposed to go from 5 to 6, but we'll give you guys some extra time. Obviously, we're starting quite a bit later, so um, I think yeah, this is a super awesome time where you guys can just go jump in and chat. We'll try to jump in for a little bit, but definitely also need to spend time. Go get some food before we have to put the kiddos down for bed. So we'll tune in for a little bit, and then we'll have to go do that. But here's a time where you guys just to get in there and chat amongst yourselves and uh, bring up questions, collaborate. There's lots of different opportunities there. We actually greatly appreciate everybody who's just been chatting away inside the chat here. There's been so many people who have put in lots of very valuable information inside of there and answered questions, and also dropped in local knowledge specific to their area. So if you're like in Canada, definitely sync up with anybody else who's in Canada who's already done it or is in the process of doing it. And likewise for other locations and so on. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, appreciate you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time this evening to hang out with us, and hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of the week and enjoy the community meetup right now.
Yeah, awesome. Well, take care, you guys, and we'll be in touch and look forward to yeah continuing more of this. And yeah, appreciate y'all. See you later.
See ya.